Hey guys, welcome to the video. Salt here. Today we're going to be going over the Warframe Valkyr Prime. But before we go over her, let's go over our commenter board. Our first commenter of the last video was Pepper the Short One, and our top commenter of the last video was Bad User 103. And if we come over here, we also have our recent channel supporter board of Whoop-De-Wham, Nice Bear, and Colonel 06. Thank you so much for your support. Before we go over the build, I want to go over Valkyr's abilities for anyone that's not aware of them. I'll have every section timestamped, so if you already know the abilities, you don't really care about them, you could always skip ahead to the next section. We're going to start with her passive here, which is Valkyr accumulates rage when hitting or killing enemies with melee weapons, increasing her melee damage up to 300%. That little rage meter will be in the bottom right of your screen when you're in game. Taking fatal damage when the rage meter is above 150% consumes the meter, preventing damage and granting 5 seconds of invulnerability. This is a really good passive, probably one of the best passives in the game. It actually has two amazing effects all combined into this one passive. Valkyr's 1 is Rip Line. You're going to shoot a grapple hook forward. If it hits a piece of terrain, it's going to pull you towards that terrain, so it's useful as a movement tool. However, if you hit an enemy with it, it's going to pull other enemies within 9 meters of that main enemy that you targeted towards that main enemy. It's going to do slash damage to them, and then it's going to trigger Valkyr to do a melee attack to them. Also, this has kind of a combo window to it, where if you again cast Rip Line within 1 second, that next cast is going to have 200% more damage and only cost 50% of the energy cost. And then another combo window, if you cast it again within 1 second, it's going to do 400% damage with a 75% energy cost. And it will stay at that max amount of 400 and then 75% reduced energy cost until you eventually don't cast it again within the combo window. Valkyr's 2 is Warcry. This is a buff aura that increases melee attack speed and armor for yourself and allies within affinity range. The armor bonus is multiplied even further if used while her 4 Hysteria is active. And again, this is only based on affinity range. So modded range doesn't increase that aura of Warcry. Valkyr's 3 is Paralysis. You'll do impact damage, up to a 75% slow, and melee damage vulnerability to enemies around you. Valkyr's 4 is Hysteria. This will equip her Exalted Talons, and while they're active, you get status immunity and you restore some HP per hit. The subsume we're going to be using is Wrathful Advance from Kalervo. This gives us an absolutely massive amount of melee critical chance on our weapons, and so it's pretty much a no-brainer for most melee frames in the game. Now the question does come down to, where do you put Wrathful Advance over? Do you put it over the 1, which is Rip Line, or do you put it over the 3, which is Paralysis? Well, let's talk about this. The 1 Rip Line, I believe, is more useful more times than Paralysis is. And that's because Rip Line, you can just kind of use it whenever you need it. You have some on-demand grouping, you have movement whenever you need it. It's just a really nice thing to keep on. Let's talk about Paralysis though. Paralysis is not something you're going to cast often because it's not an aura that follows you like Warcry is. You just cast it, it happens to the enemies within 10 meters, and that's it. So you're not going to use it on trash enemies. You're specifically only going to cast Paralysis on mini bosses or like Thraxes and Eximuses once they are way scaled higher in level. This would be too costly to cast on trash enemies. And so Paralysis is more of a boss or really big thick enemy killer, whereas Riptide is just a utility item that you can pull in your kit pretty often. So that's really going to be up to you. Do you want to ensure that you're able to kill even the heaviest things in the game with Paralysis? Then keep Paralysis on. Do you just want to have a nice utility in your kit to use like every now and then? Maybe you want to have some grouping, you have some movement, then keep Rip Line on. There's really no right or wrong here. You just have to understand what both of those things are good at. Okay, so now let's go over the build. We're going to start with the triple Umbral set first. So that's going to be Umbral Vitality for health, Umbral Fiber for armor, and Umbral Intensify for ability strength. In the next mod slot, we have Adaptation. This is when damaged, you get plus 10% resistance to that damage type for 20 seconds, stacks up to 90%. Now, if we look, our Valkyr Prime already has 2,800 armor, which is well above the amount of armor you need on your basic health and armor Warframe. And that's not even taking into consideration that that armor is going to be increased even further with things like Warcry being cast while Hysteria is active. So for most content in the game, you don't really even need adaptation. You can kind of consider this overkill, this mod right here. However, if you intend to take your Valkyr Prime to higher level content, maybe when you're going closer to level cap, or if you're doing really, really long circuit runs and you get Valkyr Prime, adaptation is going to be key there. This is what lets you scale even farther as a health and armor Warframe. So if you never do high level content, you can consider this a flex slot and you could put something else here. But if you do, definitely keep adaptation here. In the next mod slot, we have Prime Continuity for ability duration, Blind Rage for ability strength, Transient Fortitude for ability strength. Equilibrium is going to help by giving us energy when we pick up health orbs and giving us health when we pick up energy orbs. In the Ore slot, we pick Steel Charge for 60% melee damage. In the Exile slot, we have Power Drift for ability strength. And in the Arcane slots, we have Arcane Energize. This is on energy pickup, 60% chance to replenish 150 energy to self and allies within 15 meters. And then we have Arcane Battery, which is gain 0.30 maximum energy per armor point up to 1,000 energy. And you can see here we'll have 1,065 energy. Now, at first, I really did not want to use Energize. In fact, I had Molt augmented here because I was like, well, we already have Battery, we're using Equilibrium, I think we'll be fine on energy. However, because we're using Blind Rage, which is minus efficiency, and we're also using Transient Fortitude, which is minus duration, which kind of acts like efficiency when it comes to channeled abilities like Hysteria, we're getting a lot of energy sucked from us. And so with just Battery and Equilibrium, it was not enough to consistently maintain my energy. There were some missions where I was fine and I was like, well, I probably don't need Energize. But then there were other missions where I was like starving for energy orbs. And so I just came to the brutal conclusion that I needed to get rid of Molt Augmented, unfortunately, and put Arcane Energize here. And then when I started doing my testing again, it became much more comfy. So, unfortunately, yeah, you lose minus 60% ability strength because you're not using Augmented, but you get more consistency with the build by using Energize. Okay, next let's go over Valkyr Prime Talons, which is her exalted weapon. And the first thing I want to point your attention to is the really low base status chance of 10%. So for most melee weapons in the game, melee influence is an arcane you always have to consider because it's so ungodly powerful. However, because Valkyr Prime Talons has such bad base status chance, we don't really need to consider it. And so we can actually use some of the more interesting melee arcanes in the game. And if you look here, we're actually using melee exposure, which I feel is a more interesting arcane. This gives us 240% corrosive damage, which kind of makes it the one of, if not the best, single target melee arcanes in the game. So yeah, it's not going to do as much trash killing as Influence is, but we can't really use Influence on her anyway, so why not get the best single target killing with melee exposure? So let's go over the build though now. We have Primed Fever Strike for 165% Toxin. We're adding this not because we want more Toxin, not because we want a bigger corrosive number, just because adding another element on the build itself is going to affect the damage calculation, and in the end it's just going to be a bigger number, and that's why we add it. Galvanized Steel for critical chance and critical damage. Organ Shatter for critical damage. Gladiator Might for critical chance and critical damage. Condition Overload for melee damage per unique status type affecting the target. We're going to have two mods for plus range, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Well, one of the reasons is that the base range on Valkyr Prime Talons, actually let me go to blank config here. The base range on Valkyr Prime Talons is 2.1, which is really, really bad. And range doesn't matter too much if you're going to use melee influence, because melee influence is just going to kind of zap everything around you. But again, we're not using melee influence, we're using melee exposures. We actually do really want range here. And so we're going to add Primed Reach, which is +3 range. And in fact, we're going to use another mod to add even more range with Spring Loaded Blade. This is on a status effect. We get 1 range for 24 seconds, stacks up to 2 times, that's 2 range. So in total, when we're in mission, that's going to be 7.2 0.15 range. So we're going to have a lot of range on Valkyr Prime Talons. That's going to make up for us not having influence. You know, it's not going to be as big as, what is influence, 18 meters, but it's still going to be pretty decent. You know, plus we have better single target killing with exposure. So 2 range mods here. And then we're going to be using Blood Rush for 440% critical chance. In the stance slot, you can only use Hysteria. There's no options here. And in the Tennokai slot, we're going to be using Disciple's Merit, which enables a Tennokai attack every 4 melee hits instead of at random. And the heavy attack for the Valkyr Prime Talons is actually a slam. So it's really, really nice. It's probably one of the best heavy attacks in the game. And actually, if there is an option that you can do. Let me type in slam here. If you really like that heavy and you think you want to try to get more value out of that heavy because it's a really sexy slam, you could consider taking off spring-loaded blade and putting seismic wave there instead for more slam attack damage. Like, that's a consideration you could make. Personally, I'm not going to do that, but I think it's a fair side grade here. Okay, now we're going to go over externals for Valkyr Prime. None of these are mandatory. These are all optional, but I'll go over what I think are some great combo wombos for Valkyr Prime. So we're going to start with the Archon Shards, and I like using 4 purple Archon Shards for melee critical damage. So you get plus 37% melee critical damage, and when your max energy is over 500, remember our max energy is over 1,000, the damage boost doubles. That's, what is that, almost 75% melee critical damage per purple shard, and we have 4 of them. Oh my goodness, that's a lot of critical damage. And then I have 1 shard here for more effectiveness on energy orbs. Again, just to help a little bit with the energy economy on our Valkyr Prime. Okay, next I'm going to go over the primary and secondary together, just because they do kind of the same thing. This is going to be a way to get plus 90% ability strength externally on your Valkyr Prime. And to do that, in your primary slot, you're going to want to use a kit gun. And specifically, you want to use a kit gun that's really good at getting headshot kills. And I like the Rattle Guts, but there's a few other kit guns that are good at headshot kills. But it really comes down to this one hit gun arcane called Pax Bolt, where on a headshot kill, you get plus 30% ability efficiency and plus 30% ability strength on the next ability used within 4 seconds. Just remember that. We're not going to go over the whole build. I just want to go over this arcane here. Just remember that after a headshot kill, we get 30 efficiency and 30 ability strength on the next ability cast. Now we're going to go over our secondary, which is the Grimoire. And again, we're going to go into the build, and I just want to focus on one thing. It's going to be Vome Invocation. The alternate fire increases ability strength by 4% for 20 seconds for each enemy hit, stacking up to 15 times. That's a potential 60% ability strength. Remember, the kit gun was 30 and the Grimoire is 60. So that's 90% ability strength that's on the table. And her 4, which is Hysteria, is a channeled ability. So what you're gonna do is you'll do the Grimoire alternate fire first because it lasts for 20 seconds compared to the 4 seconds that the kit gun lasts for. So you'll do the Grimoire alt fire first, you let it stack up to 60, or if you're impatient, you can, switch to the kit gun before then. Any extra ability strength is nice. But let's say you let it stack up to 60, you switch over to the kit gun, you get a headshot kill with that kit gun, that triggers that effect. You have plus 90 on your next ability cast, you press to go into your 4, which is Hysteria, and then your Hysteria from then on out has a plus 90% ability strength bonus to it. The only time it'll go away is if you run out of energy or if you hit like a nullifier bubble. Okay, now for the melee slot. Now, obviously on Valkyr, you're going to be using her Valkyr Prime Talons as your melee weapon. So the power of the melee weapon itself doesn't really matter. You're looking for a melee weapon that has some kind of passive that works even when you don't have the melee weapon out. And there's a few weapons like that. There's the Praetos here, where one of its evolutions is plus 30% parkour velocity that works all the time, even when you don't have it out. And so this just is a passive buff that is always on, as long as you have the Praetos. There is also a plus 20% movement buff from the Anku Incarnon, the Bow Incarnon, and the Okina Incarnon. All 3 of those share the same evolution that gives you a plus 20% movement buff. There's one or two other weapons in the game that have some other passive effects that are active when you just have the weapon equipped, but I think the Praetos and those 3 other Incarnans are kind of like the top tier ones. For the Focus School, Naramon is an easy choice, and that's because Naramon has a passive where melee combo counter now decays while out of combat by 5 every few seconds instead of depleting completely, which means that it takes so long to deplete from 12 times to 0 that you could probably leave your computer, go take a shit, maybe get some lunch, come back, and you'll still have combo on your Valkyr. And so the Naramon tree is just so ridiculously overpowered for melee frames, it's hard to use anything else. All right, the last external to talk about is the pet for Valkyr Prime. And because Valkyr Prime is a melee frame, it's going to be a melee priming pet. And there are 2 pets that are the best melee priming pets in the game, and that's going to be either the Dirija Sentinel or the Nautilus Sentinel. And I have videos for both of them out, but I don't want to leave people confused. I don't want to leave people to just try to discover this themselves, so I'm still going to explain it here. So let's go over the Dirija. The Dirija does his melee priming through both Arc Coil and Coolant Leak, whereas Nautilus does his melee priming through only Coolant Leak. So that means Dirija is a little bit more of a consistent melee primer, just because Arc Coil is a little bit more consistent than Coolant Leak is. However, the Nautilus has a grouping tool as a precept, which is really, really powerful. So if you want to make use of the grouping tool, the Nautilus would be the way to go. So, okay, now let's go over how this works exactly. So let's talk about Arc Coil here. Sentinel will zap up to 7 enemies within 10 meters, dealing 100 electricity damage with a 10% status chance. So little area around him, he zaps dudes, he does electricity damage sometimes. Now this combos with another mod called Manifold Bond, where anything he zaps is also going to apply the elements that are on his Sentinel weapon. So we'll go over his Sentinel weapon here in a second. So just remember, not only is he having a 10% chance to do electric, but he's now going to be applying those elements from his weapon. Okay, also killing enemies with 3 or more statuses is going to reduce the internal cooldown of Arc Coil, which means that Arc Coil can pretty much zap like every second. Every second this thing is just going to be zapping out, zapping out, zapping out. And that's why it's extremely consistent. Coolant Leak is effectively the exact same thing as Arc Coil, except instead of electric in an AoE, it's like cold in an AoE. So again, Dirija, we have electric and we have cold here. Now the electric is only a 10% chance, so it's not guaranteed. So let's go over his weapon now. And I like using the Burst Laser Prime, but there are a couple of other Sentinel weapons that are also valid. So there are a few reasons why the Burst Laser Prime, along with a couple of other weapons, are the ones to choose for a melee priming weapon. The first reason is that Burst Laser Prime is a full IPS weapon, which means impact, puncture, slash. It has the impact, slash, and puncture statuses on it. The other reason Burst Laser Prime, along with a couple of other weapons, is the best ones to choose for melee priming is because they also can achieve over a 50% critical chance without a Riven, meaning that they activate another mod that's on the pet called Tenacious Bond, which increases critical damage. Okay, so now let's look at the Burst Laser Prime build. We're gonna load it up with Viral, we're gonna load it up with Heat, we're gonna have Radiation, we're gonna have Magnetic, and you might say, well, how are you deciding what elements to put on? Well, you want to maximize the highest amount of unique elements because we're trying to get the most value out of Condition Overload. And so we already know that our Valkyr Talons, we have exposure on, which is corrosive. So we don't want corrosive in any of these things here. We want other things other than corrosive. And we definitely want Viral and we definitely want Magnetic because those scale really good even only on one proc. And so that's why we're choosing Viral, Magnetic. I threw in Heat because it's another unique, and I threw in Radiation because it's another unique. The other thing you do is you add Creeping Bullseye for 200% crit chance. This gets your critical chance over 50%, which activates Tenacious Bond. And then the other thing you do, which is these are 2 flex slots that aren't super strong on Valkyr, but they're pretty good on other melee warframes if you're just going to use this as a general melee priming build, which is Karna's Stinger, which is killing an enemy with a heavy attack reduces enemy accuracy against the warframe by 10% and grants immunity to status effects for 2 seconds. It's not a lot of time, but hey, immune to status effects and some reduced accuracy on enemies is nice. Valkyr doesn't need the immunity to status effects, but that's okay. And Augur Seeker is for that Augur set bonus, which is 40% energy spent on abilities converted to shields. It's kind of okay for Valkyr, but again, it's not super needed since she's mostly a health tank. But this will give you, again, the Dirija has both Arc Coil and Coolant Leak, which is electric and cold. And then it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 2 on it, although electric is not guaranteed. So let's say 8 guaranteed, 9 sometimes statuses on enemies consistently around you. And that's what makes both the Dirija and the Nautilus the best melee priming pets in the game. This is how you build out the Warframe Valkyr Prime. I hope you guys liked it, and if you did, consider leaving a like and subscribing for future content. So now I'll leave you guys with about a 5-minute gameplay portion showing off the Warframe and her general gameplay style. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have an amazing day. All right, bye. Okay, we're about to start this gameplay portion up. We're going to showcase Valkyr Prime. Remember, we're going to start on the Grimoire. We're going to transition over to the kick gun, and then we'll go into her claws. So let that stack up to 60. There we go. We got 60 ability strength there. Let's get a headshot kill. There you go. Boom, boom, boom. And then we never have to do that again. Unless we get silenced or unless we run out of energy. But other than that, we'll just be at that permanent 90. Got the parent sequence coming after me. I'm a little bit scared. Oh, here they are. There they go. Here they are. There they go. Where are these enemies at? Oh, they're like down here fighting each other. What are you doing down here? You're supposed to be fighting me. I feel like I've done that already. Killed 30 eggs in this. Why is that just triggering? We have the Acolyte coming. Let's see how this does against the Acolyte. I'm a little bit scared. say pretty good. I would say pretty decent. I got about 30 seconds, and we got Thraxus coming. That'll give you a decent showcase of like the average gameplay on Valkyr. Oh, they're dead. All right, now he's got to get some Raplack shots on these guys. We got that guy. He's still... I need to switch over to the Clamora. I'm so bad at aiming this Raplack. All right, so that's the showcase on Valk Prime. I think we'll end it here.